The startup klaxon screamed while Tobias Brackett still had both arms inside the reactor housing. He was 9 meters up in the guts of a 100-ton Atlas, wrist deep in a coolant manifold that was not supposed to be live for another 20 minutes. Above him, Captain Leander Thorne had thumbed the ignition sequence anyway. 90 seconds to containment. Brackett had maybe 40 of them, and his left hand was still trapped behind the shielding. Nobody was coming. He pulled. The skin came off the back of his hand in a long ribbon against the edge of the shield plate. He did not feel it. What he felt was the VLA 300 waking under his boots, a subsonic groan that began somewhere in the machine's hips and climbed up through the ribs of the torso frame, like water rising in a well. He got his arm clear. He got his shoulder out of the access gap. Then he was falling more than climbing, hands and heels on the inspection rungs. 3 meters, 5 meters, the coolant lines above him already ticking as they took pressure. The ankle hatch was open. He went through it headfirst into gravel and rolled and kept rolling. Because 100 tons of battle mech taking its first step does not care what is under its heel. The Atlas took its first step. The foot came down 2 meters from Brackett's ribs, and the ground jumped. And for one long second he lay on his back in the churned red dirt of Marrowbone Ridge, looking straight up at 14 meters of Star League murder. The Death's Head cockpit swiveled. Somewhere behind that grinning skull, Vaughn was looking down at him. The external speaker crackled. "You were slow, Chief." Then the Atlas turned north and walked away at 32.4 kilometers per hour, unhurried, the way it always walked, and left Brackett bleeding on the ridge with the taste of scorched coolant in his throat. Marisol Ruiz got to him first. She had a torque bar in one hand and murder on her face, and she was looking at the retreating back of the Atlas rather than at Brackett. "Hand," Brackett said. She looked down. Blood of the blessed. It's skin. Skin grows back. He sat up. His ears were ringing at a frequency that suggested his day was going to get worse. "Radio the field base. Tell them the number 2. Exchanger on the Arcs is seated, but not torqued. Tell them if he pushes past 20 on the heat scale, it will weep. And if it weeps, he loses the whole left side loop. Tell him yourself. He's not listening to me. He's listening to a Zeus somewhere north of that ridgeline." Brackett got his feet under him. "Radio it anyway, so it's on the log." That was the 4th day of the ground campaign on Lorik in the year 3022, and the Ashgrove Legion had already burned through more armor plate than it had budgeted for the whole contract. Lorik was a Lyran Commonwealth border world, and it had been won for a long time. Long enough that its people had rebuilt the same 4 towns, 3 separate times, after 3 separate Free Worlds League landings. It was a cold, wet, green place of river valleys and basalt ridges, and it made a particular kind of mud that ate lubricant seals. The Legion had been on contract to the Free Worlds League military for 8 months. The objective was the Van Broo Works, an armor plate rolling mill on the Sandvoss River. And the obstacle was a Lyran garrison dug into a line of low hills the locals called the Coldwater. 28 Mechs. That was the Ash Grove Legion, a battalion in name and by contract, under strength the way every mercenary battalion in the Succession Wars was under strength. 3 companies that should have been 36 machines, and never once had been. Major Ilsa Redfern commanded from an Orion ON-1K. There was a medium company built around a spine of trebuchets and hunchbacks. There was a light company that did the scouting and the screening and the dying. And there was the Atlas. One Atlas, model AS-7D, 100 tons, a genuine Star League design, still walking 267 years past its first assembly line, with 19 tons of Duralix plate on its bones, and a Defiance Mech Hunter autocannon 20 in its right torso, and a Farfire maxi rack in its left, an SRM-6 in the left torso, alongside the Farfire. 4 medium lasers, 2 in the arms, and 2 facing back from its center torso. It was the reason the Legion could ask for the contracts it asked for. It was the single most valuable object any of them would ever touch. It could not be replaced. Its pilot was 26 years old and had bought his commission. Brackett walked back to the recovery rig with his hand wrapped in a rag, and behind him, 4 kilometers north, the guns started. The Overlord-class dropship Ironmonger sat in a plowed field 2 kilometers behind the line, with her ramps down and her bay lights burning, and by midnight she smelled the way she always smelled after a bad day: hot metal, ozone, myomer resin, and the particular sweet chemical stink of a coolant loop that had cooked. Brackett stood on the #1 gantry at chest height to the Atlas and looked at what Vaughn had done to it. The left arm had lost most of its outer plate, from elbow to shoulder. The right torso was worse. Something with a large laser had walked a line across the autocannon housing, and the ferrous slag had run down into the seam and welded the access panel to the frame, which meant the panel was now a permanent part of the mech. Unless somebody cut it off. 4 missile hits along the center line, a gouge across the left knee actuator housing that Halim Sarkis was already down on his belly examining, with a hand lamp and an expression of professional grief. "Chief," Sarkis did not look up. "The upper hinge pin is bent." "How much?" "Enough that I can feel it. Not enough that I can measure it." "Then it's bent." Brackett put his good hand flat against the armor plate. It was still warm. 9 hours after the fight, 100 tons of battle mech was still giving back the heat it had eaten. Pull it. Straighten it if you can. Replace it if you can't. We have 2 spares. We have 1 spare. Brackett closed his eyes for a moment. Then straighten it. This was the work. Not the fighting. The work. 8 months of it, in the grease-stained bowels of a dropship that had been old when his father was young, and Brackett had come to understand that a battle mech was not a weapon at all. A weapon was a thing you used. A battle mech was a thing you kept, an argument you had with entropy every single night, and the argument was never won, only extended. He knew this machine the way a surgeon knows a patient he has opened 40 times. He knew that the autocannon 20 in the right torso had been built without a proper cooling jacket. An old defiance economy that had seemed clever while the Star League still stood, and had been trying to kill Atlas pilots ever since, so that after 9 or 10 rounds the barrel assembly ran hot enough to make the feed sensors lie. He knew that the far fire in the left torso could not physically fit 20 tubes, so it spat its salvo in waves of 5 across 10 full seconds, which meant that every time Vaughn pulled that trigger, the machine stood there and announced itself for 10 seconds. He knew that between the missile launchers there was an aperture that everyone who had never worked on an Atlas assumed was a third weapon, and that it was in fact an omnicoupling, a power and coolant junction. The single spot on the machine where you could feed it from outside, and the place Brackett had spent more hours of his life than any other square meter of the universe. He knew where its 20 heat sinks lived. He knew, to the degree, what happened inside the cockpit when the pilot ignored them. Devon, the Aztec, appeared at his elbow with the look of a 19-year-old who had been awake for 20 hours and would rather die than admit it. Devon Paget was from a farm on Oriente and had signed on because a recruiter had said the word travel. Go get the flow log off the Ox's left side loop. Not the summary, the whole trace. Paget went. Marisol Ruiz came up the gantry ladder with 2 cups of something that was legally coffee, handed one over, and leaned on the rail beside him. How's the hand? Attached. That's the standard. She drank. You going to file it? File what? The startup. Tobias. She said his given name the way she only did when there was no one else on the gantry. He lit the reactor with you inside the shielding. There's an article for that in every contract ever written, ours included. There's an article, Brackett agreed. And there's a hearing, and the hearing goes to the Major, and the Major asks Captain Vaughn what happened, and Captain Vaughn says the tech was slow, and then it's a captain's word about a chief's word. And I still have to fix his mech in the morning, and the article stays on the log either way, which is where I want it. That's a long game. It's the only board I'm allowed to play on. Below them, the bay doors opened, and the light company began to come home. They came in on their own feet, which was the good news. All 4 of them, mud to the knees. The Wolverine first, Lieutenant Ekaterina Volmers, 55 tons, a Merrick-built WVR-6M, with a large laser where the autocannon used to be, and 5 jump jets that let it go 150 meters at a hop. Behind it, the Stinger. Behind that, walking with the particular apologetic hitch of a machine that has taken a hit in a leg and is pretending otherwise, came a Locust LCT-1V. 20 tons, the smallest thing in the Legion and the fastest. 129.6 kilometers per hour, flat out with the wind behind it. Roan Wexley shut it down, climbed out of the cockpit, and came across the bay deck, still in his cooling vest, with his neuro helmet under his arm. Chief, he called up, you still alive? Debatable. I heard about the startup. Wexley was 24 and had a face that had never learned to hide anything. The whole company heard about the startup. Then the whole company can stop talking about it. Volmer arrived behind him without seeming to have crossed the deck. She was 38, skyborn, and she had been a mercenary since she was 17. She looked at Brackett's hand for 2 full seconds. and did not comment on it. He broke formation again, she said. Brackett set his cup down on the rail. Where? Marrowbone. He had the center. He was supposed to hold the center and let us peel their right flank off the ridge. Instead, he saw a Zeus. Her voice did not change at all, which was how Brackett knew how angry she was. He put 100 tons through the middle of their line at his own private speed and left a 400-meter hole where the center used to be, and their whole reserve came through it into my scouts. Anybody hurt? Zabala took a laser through the Stinger's left arm. Wexley took a short-range missile volley in the leg armor at 40 meters. Vollmer's jaw worked once. 40 meters, Tobias. From a commando that should never have been within 400 meters of my people. Was he pushing the heat? He was pushing everything. Then that's the 4th time. Brackett rubbed his eyes. 4th engagement. 4th break. He's not learning. He's confirming. 2 days later, on the Hollowell Flats, the Legion lost its first machine and its first pilot, and Brackett heard all of it happen through a headset in the back of a recovery rig. That was the Technicians' War. Brackett had never fired a weapon at another human being in his life. He had spent 29 years within arm's reach of the machines that did, and the whole of his combat experience consisted of sitting in a tracked vehicle 2 kilometers behind a firing line with a telemetry board on his knees, listening to numbers and voices, and knowing exactly, to the degree and the second, what those numbers meant. The Hollowell Flats were 4 kilometers of open drainage country between the Sandvoss River and the toe of the Coldwater Hills, without cover for anything larger than a scout car. The Legion's job that morning was a probe. Nobody was supposed to be decisive. Brackett had the Atlas's telemetry feed open, on the left half of his board. Heat, ammunition, actuator load, coolant flow through the loop he had reseated with his own bleeding hands. On the right half, he had the light company. He could not see the battle. He could see it better than anyone on it. At 11 minutes past the hour, the Lyran commander showed himself. Legion Command, this is Ash 2. Vollmer's voice, flat and clipped through the static. Contact, bearing 035, range 1100 meters. Assault mech, 80 tons. I read as Zeus, model ZEU-6S, and he's not alone. Count 4 supporting, medium, and light. The Zeus was a Lyran machine to its bones. Defiance Industries out of Hesperus, 80 tons, faster on its feet than an Atlas at 64.8 kilometers per hour. Flat out. With an autocannon 5 in the right arm and a Coventry Star Fire LRM-15 in the left, and a Thunderbolt large laser buried in the left torso. It was built to hit at long range and refuse to be caught. Every Lyran Hauptmann who had ever piloted one had learned the same lesson in the same academy. Keep the range. Make the heavy man walk to you. Hauptmann Gerd Kirchner had clearly been an excellent student. Brackett watched the range figure on his board and did the arithmetic without wanting to. 1100 meters. Nothing on the Atlas reached 1100 meters. The Farfire could throw a salvo 630 meters at its outside edge. The Autocannon 20 was a 270-meter weapon, a close-quarters butcher's tool that hit like a dropped building. and could not touch anything past a good rifle shot. The Zeus could reach 540 with the autocannon, and 630 with the missiles, and could do it while backing away at speed. Command: Ash 2, Volmer again. Recommend we break contact and log the position. He's baiting. The channel opened and Brackett's stomach dropped, because he knew the sound of that carrier tone before the first word arrived. Ash 2 Sovereign. Vaughn, calm and pleased. I have him. Sovereign, negative. He has you. Hold the center. Command, Sovereign. I am moving to engage. Major Redfern's voice came in hard. Sovereign, hold position. Say again, hold position. That's an order from the battalion. And then, only the numbers. Brackett did not need the voice channel after that, because the telemetry told him everything in a language he had spoken his entire adult life. The Atlas's speed went from 32.4 to 54 kilometers per hour, which was the Vlar 300 giving everything it had, which was still slower than the machine running away from it. Heat, baseline. Heat, +6, as the Farfire dumped 20 missiles at a target well outside a hopeful gunner's honest range. Heat, +6, again, 90 seconds later. Ammunition counter falling. 2 salvos, 3, 4, out of 12. At 300 meters of closing, Kirshner's Zeus simply walked backward and kept shooting. He's giving ground, Brackett said out loud. To nobody, to the inside of a recovery rig. He's giving ground because he can. Turn around, you fool. Heat, +7. The autocannon 20 firing at a target 400 meters away, which was pure waste. A 10-round magazine emptied a round at a time into nothing. Heat, +12, +15. The number on Brackett's board climbed past 20, and the coolant flow through the left side loop began to flutter in exactly the way he had told them it would. And behind the Atlas, a 400-meter hole opened in the Legion's advance for the second time in 3 days, and the Lyran Reserve came through it. The light company was on the left. 4 machines, none of them heavier than 55 tons, on flat open ground, with 100 tons of anchor gone from their right shoulder. Contact left, 2 lances. Ash 4, break right. Ash 2 to all Ash elements. Fall back to the ditch line. Do not engage. Fall back. They're inside 400, Lieutenant. I can't. Zabala, jump. Now. Jump. And keep jumping. Brackett sat with his hands flat on the board and listened to a fight he could not see and could not touch, and the numbers on the right half of his screen began to go wrong. Armor values falling. The Stinger's left side, the Wolverine's forward plate. A Lyran Griffin somewhere in that mess, 55 tons with a particle cannon in the right arm, hunting at a range where a particle cannon does exactly what it was built to do. Then Wexley's voice, and it was not frightened. That was the thing Brackett would carry afterward. It was not frightened at all. Ash 2, Ash 4. Zabala's jets are down. She's on foot in the open. Ash 4, negative. Do not. I'm faster than all of them, Lieutenant. I'll make him look at me. A locust weighed 20 tons. It carried 4 tons of armor, which was a phrase that sounded substantial and was not. It mounted 1 medium laser and 2 machine guns, and its entire theory of survival was that nothing could hit what nothing could catch. And at 129.6 kilometers per hour, across flat, open ground, that theory had held for 5 centuries. It did not require the Griffin to catch him. It only required the Griffin to guess right once. The telemetry line for Ash 4 went to 0 in the time it takes to say a short word. Nobody said anything on the channel for 4 seconds. Then Vollmer, in a voice Brackett had never heard her use, "Ash 4 is down. Ash 4 is down. No ejection. All Ash elements. Ditch line. Now." And 30 seconds after that, over the open battalion frequency, clear as a bell and utterly without shame, "Command, Sovereign. Target is withdrawing. Request permission to pursue." They brought the Locust back that night because you always bring them back. Brackett took the recovery detail himself and did not let Paget come. It lay in a drainage ditch on the hollow well flats, with its legs folded under it, a small machine looking smaller, and the crew worked around it in lamplight with the quiet economy of people who had done this before. A tarp went over the forward section before the lift cradle came in. Nobody discussed it. Sarkis cut the cockpit seals, and the recovery corpsman went in alone with a light. And everyone else found something to do with their hands, until he came out again and shook his head once. And after that, the only thing left to recover was 20 tons of metal. Brackett stayed until the cradle was chained. Then he walked the length of the wreck and put his palm flat on the cold plate above the center torso, where the medium laser mount was, and stood there for a while. He had rebuilt that laser mount in a rainstorm, on a world Ford jumps back, with Wexley holding the light and complaining about the rain. Chief Ruiz behind him, gentle. Rigs loaded. Give me a minute. Take 2. He took one. The Legion held a service the next morning at the foot of the Ironmonger's ramp. Major Ilsa Redfern read the roll herself, badly, and did not pretend otherwise. 28 machines had become 27. 28 pilots had become 27. Afterward, Brackett requested a formal interview with the battalion commander, in writing, through the adjutant, in the manner prescribed by the articles. Redfern's cabin aboard the Ironmonger was 2.5 meters by 3. She was 54, gray at the temples, and she had commanded the Ashgrove Legion for 11 years. Chief Brackett. She did not offer him a seat, because there wasn't one. You could have knocked on the door. I could have. This one I wanted in writing. Say it then. I am formally reporting Captain Leander Thorne for repeated unauthorized departure from assigned formation in the presence of the enemy. Brackett kept his voice level and slow, the way you read out a torque spec. 5 engagements. 5 breaks. The Corvo Culvert, the ford at Sandvoss, the Tromoth Road, Marrowbone Ridge, and yesterday, on the Hollowell Flats. I have the telemetry traces for all 5, and I have the coolant flow logs that show he was operating above the machine's rated envelope in 3 of them. I am also reporting that on the 4th day of the campaign, He initiated a reactor start with a technician inside the shielding. Redfern looked at him for a long moment. Is that all of it? That's all of it. Good. She reached past him, opened a drawer, and put a data slate on the little fold-down desk between them. Because I've been keeping the same list since the 3rd week of this contract. Mine has 7 entries. Yours is missing the 2 he pulled before you started paying attention. She tapped the slate. It has gone to the League liaison twice. Formal endorsement, both times. My signature, my rating. And Colonel Bertrand's staff thanked me for my diligence, and observed that the Ash Grove Legion has advanced 11 kilometers in 8 months, which is more than the regular battalions on either side of us have managed. Her mouth went thin. They are winning ground, Chief. They will not relieve a man who keeps taking hills. Then relieve him yourself. You're the battalion commander. Ground him and give the Atlas to somebody who can count. Sit down, Redfern said. There's no chair. Then lean on something, because I am about to tell you a thing I have told exactly 2 people in this unit, and I do not intend to say it twice. She waited until he leaned. The Atlas is not ours. Brackett felt the deck tilt very slightly. We do not own that machine. We have never owned that machine. 9 years ago, the Legion was down to 19 Mechs and 1 bad contract from dissolution, and a mercantile house out of Oriente offered to underwrite an assault mech against the unit's future earnings. Standard instrument. 30-year note, ruinous terms. The house is called Vaughn. She let that sit. The note has a rider. The lending house names the pilot. That's not legal. It is completely legal, and it is in every 3rd mercenary contract in the inner sphere. Redfern's voice did not rise. That was somehow worse. If I ground Leander Thorne, his family calls the note within the month. If they call the note, we surrender the Atlas. If we surrender the Atlas, our combat rating falls by a full grade. The League contract terminates for material change of force, and the Ashgrove Legion goes home from Lorik with no employer, no bond, and no assault mech, which means no serious contract, which means dissolution inside 2 years. She spread her hands. 27 pilots, 160 ground crew. Your people, Chief. Brackett stared at the deck plating. So we feed him, he said. So we manage him. Redfern picked up the slate and put it back in the drawer. I put the light company on the far flank so his brakes cost us the least. I keep the mediums close so they can plug the hole he makes. I write it all down, and I wait for the contract to end. And then I sell the Legion's future to somebody else and buy that machine out from under his family. And it will take me 6 years. She looked up. Roan Wexley did not have 6 years. I know. I read the roll. Yes, ma'am. You want me to tell you there's a clean way? I'd like that very much. So would I, said Major Redfern. The order came at 1 in the morning on the eve of the assault, and Vaughn delivered it in person, on the gantry, in front of the crew. He came up the ladder in a clean flight suit, with his neurohelmet under his arm. and he stood at the rail, looking at the atlas the way a man looks at a horse he has bet on. Chief Brackett, walk me through the heat management architecture. Brackett wiped his hands. Ruiz put down the spanner she was holding. Paget, 40 meters down the bay, stopped moving entirely. 20 single heat sinks, sir, distributed through the torso and legs. 2 closed coolant loops off the VLA 300, cross-fed at the Omni coupling. Automatic reactor shutdown on the master interlock. Thermal cutouts on the autocannon feed and both missile bays. Master caution on the board, and the reactor shutdown. What trips it? 30 on the heat scale, sir. Standard. And if I don't want it to trip. Brackett looked at him. Then you're asking about the override, sir. The override is in the cockpit. You hold it and you argue with the machine, and sometimes the machine loses. Sometimes, Vaughn repeated. I don't care for sometimes, Chief. Tomorrow morning, I am going to take that line at the Corvo Gap, and I am going to do it by myself, because 11 kilometers in 8 months is what happens when a battalion moves at the speed of its slowest coward. He turned. I want the master interlock hard-wired open. I want the thermal cutouts on the feed and the bays pulled. I want the master caution silenced. I don't need a bell telling me what I can feel. And I want both loops run at maximum flow, seals be damned. I want that machine incapable of telling me no. Nobody on the gantry moved. Sir, Brackett said, if I pull the cutouts and you run the autocannon hot, the feed sensors will lie to you. Rounds cook in the bin. That's not a shutdown. That's a detonation. In your right torso, under your feet. Then I'll shoot faster. If I hardwire the interlock open, you can hold 30. You cannot hold 35. At 35, the myomer in the legs starts going soft, and at 40, it stops being myomer. You will be a statue with a live reactor and a full ammunition bay. Then, I won't reach 40. Sir, with respect, you reached 28 on the Hollowell Flats, and you did it in 90 seconds. Vaughn smiled. It was a young man's smile, entirely without malice, and that was the thing that frightened Brackett most about him. There was no cruelty in it at all. There was only a total and serene absence of the idea that other people were real. Chief, do you know what my grandfather's house paid for that machine? To the C-bill, sir. I signed the maintenance draw against it every month. That landed somewhere. Vaughn's smile flickered. Then you know whose it is. Have it ready by dawn. That's an order. And it's a lawful one, and I'll be logging it as such. He went down the ladder. The bay stayed silent for a long time after the hatch closed. Chief, Ruiz said at last, tell me you're not going to do it. Go to bed, Marisol. Tobias. Everybody off the gantry. He did not raise his voice. That's the last order I'm going to give any of you on this ship, and I'd be obliged if you'd take it without asking me why. Sakis, Paget, Ruiz. Off. Now. They went, because he had never in 8 months spoken to them like that. At 3 a.m, Master Chief Technician Tobias Brackett stood alone on the number 1 gantry, with a hydro wrench in his hand. 40 meters of empty bay behind him. and the Atlas's chest opened up in front of him like a cathedral with the roof off. The coolant lines ran in bundles the thickness of his thigh, sheathed in gray composite, wet with condensation. Behind them, the interlock housing. Behind that, the reactor shielding. And behind that, the small sun that made all of this possible. He thought about the ghost vault first, because it was the obvious thing, and because it was clean. He could put a fault in the gyro feedback loop. Nothing physical. A resistance mismatch in a sensor line. The kind of thing that developed on its own in a 260-year-old machine. On a wet world, the board would throw a caution at power-up. The machine would refuse to stand. Vaughn would rage, and the Legion would go into the Corvo Gap without its Atlas. And by the time Brackett was made to find the fault, the assault would be over. It would take 4 minutes and be indistinguishable from bad luck, and it would kill them. He stood there and made himself run it all the way to the end. Honestly, the way he ran every diagnostic. 27 machines going into a fortified line against a Lyran garrison with an 80-ton anchor of its own, and the Ashgrove Legion's own anchor sitting in a dropship bay with a false fault in its gyro. No 100 tons in the center. No 19 tons of Duralix plate, soaking the fire that would otherwise land on Volmer's people. The light company on the flank, with nothing to hide behind. He had spent 6 days being furious at Vaughn for taking the Atlas out of the center of the line. And the Ghost Vault would do exactly that, permanently, and dress it up as an act of conscience. The problem had never been that the Atlas was in the fight. The problem was that its pilot could not be told no. Brackett set the Hydra wrench down on the gantry rail and looked at the interlock housing for a long, long time. Then he opened his kit and got out a relay, a spool of shielded line, and a hand crimper. It took him 4 hours and 11 minutes. He did not hardwire the master interlock open. He left it exactly as Kerensky's engineers had built it. Live, honest, tripping at 30 on the heat scale. He did not pull the thermal cutouts on the autocannon feed or the missile bays. He cleaned their contacts instead because they had been made before the Star League fell, and he had never liked the resistance reading on the left bay. He did not silence the master caution. He ran both coolant loops at rated flow, and he retorqued the number 2 exchanger properly, on his knees, with his ruined left hand wrapped in tape. What he built was a lie. He cut into the status bus behind the cockpit board and installed his relay between the interlock sensors and the display, and he set it so that the 4 indicators Vaughn would look at on power-up. Master interlock, feed cutout, bay cutout. Master caution. Would every one of them read bypassed? Green across. The board would tell Captain Leander Thorne that his machine had been stripped of every safety it possessed, and would obey him to the point of self-destruction. The machine would tell him nothing of the kind. He climbed down at 7:10 and stood on the bay deck looking up at it. 100 tons of Star League iron with a grinning skull for a head, and he understood exactly what he had done. Under the articles of the Ashgrove Legion's contract, falsification of a combat system indicator in the face of the enemy was not negligence and was not insubordination. It was sabotage. In the field, In wartime, sabotage carried one sentence, and everyone in the battalion knew what it was. He went to his berth, took a clean sheet of flimsy, and wrote out in his own hand what he had installed, where, and why, with a wiring diagram beneath it. And he signed it, and dated it, and sealed it, and put it in his locker where anyone would find it. Not to be caught. To make sure that when they came for someone, they came for the right one. The Ashgrove Legion crossed the start line at the Corvo Gap at 8 minutes past 8 in the morning, under a low gray sky. 27 machines in 3 staggered echelons. And for 9 minutes, it was the most beautiful thing Brackett had ever watched. The Atlas held the center. It walked at 32.4 kilometers per hour, with the medium stepped back 40 meters on either side, and the Lyran line put everything it had into that grinning skull, because there was nothing else on the field worth shooting at, and 19 tons of Duralic Special Heavy simply ate it. Missiles burst across the chest and did nothing. Autocannon rounds walked up the left arm and did nothing. The Farfire answered in waves of 5, 10 seconds a salvo, methodical as a metronome, and the Lyran forward positions began to come apart. That was what 100 tons was for. That was what the Star League's best engineers had been for. Held in line, the Atlas was not a weapon. It was a wall that shot back. Brackett sat in the recovery rig, 1,100 meters back, with the telemetry on his knees, and watched the heat needles sit at 11, 12, 11. And for 9 minutes he let himself believe. At 9 minutes and 40 seconds, Hauptmann Gerd Kirchner brought his Zeus out from behind the northern shoulder of the gap. Sovereign command. Hold the center. Mediums are peeling their right. Hold the center. Command, Sovereign. I have him. Vaughn. Hold. The heat needle began to climb as the Atlas went to 54 kilometers per hour. Brackett watched the numbers and understood that Vaughn had looked at his board and seen 4 green indicators where 4 cautions ought to be, and had decided that the machine could not stop him. At 700 meters, the Farfire +6. At 600, the Farfire again, and the Zeus was already backing, and Kirchner put a Thunderbolt large laser through the Atlas's left arm at 440 meters and took the actuator housing with it. At 260 meters, Vaughn got what he had wanted for 8 months. The autocannon 20 reached out to 270 meters, and not 1 step further, and Vaughn put it exactly where it needed to go. And 80 tons of Lyran assault mech folded sideways as its right arm came off at the shoulder, and the Defiance Type J autocannon went cartwheeling into the mud. It was, Brackett would admit later, a genuinely magnificent shot. The heat needle stood at 19. Then Vaughn fired everything else. Autocannon, both missile racks, both forward lasers, both rear lasers, at a full run, in one moment, because there was nothing on the board telling him not to. 23 points of heat out the front arc, 6 more from the rear lasers, 2 more from running. 31 generated against 20 sinks that could shed 20. 30. The master interlock, which had been built by engineers who worked for Alexander Kerensky, and had never once in 267 years been asked to do anything but its job, did its job. The Atlas went dark, 240 meters from the enemy line, mid-stride, and came down on one knee in the open ground of the Corvo Gap, with its reactor cold and its cockpit sealed and its pilot inside. For 2 full seconds, nobody on any channel said anything at all. Then the Lyran line opened up on a stationary target, and the center of the Ashgrove Legion's advance stopped being an advance. Command, Ash 2. Sovereign is down, and I have 2 lances coming through the gap on my left. All elements, this is command. Fall back to the ditch line. Fall back. Negative, negative. If we fall back, he's alone out there. Brackett was already moving. He did not remember deciding. He remembered getting the rig's driver by the collar and saying the word forward. And he remembered the driver saying something about orders. And he remembered not answering. The recovery rig was tracked, unarmored, and had a top speed that a walking Atlas could have matched. And it crossed 1,100 meters of open ground in the longest 4 minutes of Tobias Brackett's life, while the Coldwater line shot at everything that moved. He went out the back before it stopped. The Atlas knelt over him like a collapsed cathedral, chest plate scorched black, left arm hanging. He found the ankle hatch by touch because he had opened it 400 times. And he went up the inside of the leg in the dark with his hands and his elbows, past the myomor bundles into the hip cavity, up through the torso frame to the interlock housing. His relay was still there. Neat crimps. Good line. His own work. He tore it out with his bare hands. Then he found the manual restart plate and set the sequence and held it and counted. 90 seconds. The Vlar 300 came up under his boots exactly the way it had on Marrowbone Ridge. The same subsonic groan climbing through the frame. And this time, Tobias Brackett was the one who had started it. He went up through the neck into the cockpit. Vaughn was still in the seat. The cockpit was 70-some degrees and stinking of hot polymer, and the captain's hands had blistered where he had gripped the console during shutdown. And he was breathing, and he was not conscious, and he was not going to be for some while. Brackett got him out of the harness and down onto the deck plating behind the seat and put a coolant pack against his neck. Then he looked at the empty seat and at the boards coming up green and at the tactical repeater where 17 contact markers were closing on a ditch line that held 4 of his friends. There was a spare neuro helmet clipped in the bulkhead rack. Every mech in the Legion carried one. It was not calibrated to Tobias Brackett. It had never been calibrated to anyone at all. He put it on. The world went sideways. That was the honest sensation. A neuro helmet. Read the balance signals off a pilot's inner ear and fed the gyro what it needed. And an uncalibrated helmet fed it garbage. And the machine's whole sense of up became a rumor. He got the Atlas's left foot under it, and it nearly went over, and he sat there with his teeth locked and both hands on the sticks, and did the only thing 29 years had actually taught him. He stopped trying to make it do anything clever. Ash, too. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. This is Brackett, in Sovereign. I have the machine. I can't fight it. I can walk it. 4 seconds. Then Volmer, absolutely level. Tobias, can you stand it up between us and them? Yes. Then do that. He stood it up. It took 11 seconds, and it was the ugliest thing that 100 tons had ever done. And then he put its shoulders square to the Lyran line and began to walk backward, one deliberate step at a time, toward the ditch. Sovereign, Ash 2, target bearing 010, range 500, I'm spotting for you. Just pull the missile trigger. Don't aim. I'll do the aiming. He pulled the missile trigger. The Farfire coughed its salvo out in waves of 5 over 10 seconds, and most of it went nowhere and enough of it did not, and Kirchner's one-armed Zeus broke stride. After that, Brackett did not fire again. He walked. He walked backward across 400 meters of open ground, with the front chest of a 100-ton Atlas squared, to a Lyran fortified line. And everything they had came at him, and landed on the thickest armor ever bolted to a battle mech. And behind him, a Wolverine and a Stinger, and 2 trebuchets came out of the ditch and went home. Armor gauges falling on the left chest, falling on the right, the large laser again and again. He never let the machine turn. A turn would show them a side torso, and a side torso had ammunition in it. The Zeus fired its last missile salvo at 300 meters. Coventry Starfire, 8 full loads and no more. A complaint Lyran pilots had been making for 2 centuries. And then it had nothing at range but a large laser and a bad temper. And the Ashgrove Legion's medium company came through the gap on the right, with 8 machines abreast, and Hauptmann Kirchner did the sensible thing, and withdrew behind the Coldwater. Brackett walked the Atlas to the ditch line, put it down on both knees, and shut down the reactor properly. By the book, in sequence. Then he sat in another man's chair, in a machine he had no right to be in, and shook so hard he could not get the neurohelmet off. The Ashgrove Legion took the Van Brew Works 2 days later from the south, with the Atlas anchoring the center of the line at 32.4 kilometers per hour, and a borrowed lieutenant from the medium company in its seat. The Lyran garrison withdrew across the Sandvoss and did not come back. The contract closed at full performance. 27 machines came off Lorik. Roan Wexley stayed. The inquiry convened aboard the Ironmonger 9 days after the Corvo Gap, and it lasted 40 minutes because Brackett did not contest a single point of it. They had found the sealed flimsy in his locker before they thought to ask him for it, which meant the wiring diagram was already in evidence when he walked in. Ruiz tried to say she had helped. Sarkis tried to say he had known. Brackett stood up and told Major Redfern on the record that both of them were lying to protect him, that he had ordered the gantry cleared at 1 in the morning precisely so no one else could be implicated, and that every crimp in that relay had been made by his own 2 hands. Then he said the rest of it, plainly, what he had been ordered to do, what he had done instead, that he had known the machine would shut down, that he had known where and roughly when, and that he had gone ahead anyway. Redfern asked him one question. Did you intend Captain Vaughn's death? No, ma'am. I intended his machine to be able to tell him no. Brackett looked at the deck, but I knew it might come to the same thing. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I didn't. Vaughn testified from a medical berth with both hands wrapped. Heat prostration, second-degree burns, a grounding order from the ship's surgeon that would outlast the contract. He was furious and articulate and entirely correct about the law. And every word he said about Brackett was true, and the battalion telemetry logs sat on the table beside him recording 8 unauthorized breaks in the face of the enemy. And everyone in the compartment understood that both things were on the record forever now, side by side, and that neither one erased the other. Under the articles, sabotage of a combat system in the field carried a capital sentence. Redfern had the authority to impose it, and the authority to reduce it. And she took 11 minutes. Master Chief Technician Tobias Brackett was stripped of his rating and his certification, reduced to technician, barred from lead maintenance authority for the remainder of his service with the Ash Grove Legion, and fined the balance of his contract share. He kept his life. He kept his hands. He was, the Major noted for the record, to remain aboard. The House of Vaughn called the note within the month. The Atlas went to a factor's yard on Irian, and the Legion's combat rating fell a full grade, exactly as Redfern had said it would, and it would be 6 years before they owned anything that heavy again. They all knew what it had cost. They all knew what it had bought. 4 months later, on a wet world, 3 jumps from Lorik, Ekaterina Volma found him under a Wolverine's left knee at 2 a.m, with an actuator pin in his teeth and no rank at all on his coveralls. "They've got you on hinge pins," she said. "I'm good at hinge pins." She crouched. "Tobias, would you do it again?" Brackett took the pin out of his mouth and thought about it honestly. The way he ran every diagnostic, all the way to the end. "I'd do it sooner," he said. Then he went back to work, because the knee was out of true, and the machine had to walk in the morning, and there was nobody else in the bay who could seat that pin right.